before we dive into the depths of darkness and this chilling tale. If you enjoy these mysterious journeys, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to join the Night Dailies family. Also, if you have your own unexplained stories, share them with us in the comments. Now, if you're ready, let's begin. It had been exactly 3 weeks since I left behind the city's endless hum. The honking horns and the skyscrapers piling on top of one another. My father's reassignment and the search for peace by my mother and me had brought us to this quiet town, Yezavati. It was a place that looked like it had jumped straight out of an old postcard, where every house had a wide garden and people smiled at each other saying, "Good morning." In the first few days, everything was so perfect that it was impossible to notice something rotting beneath that perfection. The house we moved into was an old mansion with 2 floors, a wooden veranda, and a garden surrounded by massive pine trees. Right next door lived Mr. Miller. Miller was one of the town's oldest residents. On the first day, he brought us a basket full of apples picked from his garden and said with that sincere smile on his face, "Everything flows slowly here, son. It will take time for you to get used to it." And it truly was so. It was as if time had stopped here. About a month after moving in, that strange restlessness fell into me like a worm. It all began that night when I woke up, thirsty in the kitchen. It was already well past midnight. While drinking water in the silence of the hallway, I heard a rhythmic dot sound coming from outside. Thud, thud, thud. That dull sound of someone hitting hard earth with heavy metal. At first, I thought it was construction or a door slamming in the wind. I approached the kitchen window and slightly parted the curtain. The moonlight had painted Mr. Miller's backyard a pale gray. Miller, with an agility unexpected from his set frame, was digging a hole under that old willow tree in the very center of his garden. He was wearing only thin pajamas and was dot-throwing the dirt out fiercely, as if trying to reach a treasure or a corpse. He stopped, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and then suddenly turned his head toward our kitchen window. I held my breath, cowering behind the curtain, while my heart pounded. I felt his eyes glowing in the darkness. I didn't move for minutes. Then I heard that thud sound again. He was continuing to dig. I couldn't sleep until morning that night. When morning came, thought my first task was to look at the garden. But what I saw horrified me. Mila's garden was seamless. There was no hole, no fresh pile of dirt, and no dug-up area. Everything was as well kept and peaceful as yesterday. Miller, meanwhile, waved at me while sipping his coffee on his veranda. "Good morning, Marcus. Did you sleep well last night?" he shouted. His voice was cheerful as always, but the fixedness in his eyes made me shiver. When I went to school, this was all I could think about. I explained the situation to Leo, whom I had recently met and quickly bonded with. Leo was a local of this town. He knew everything. "Miller," Leo said, lowering his voice. "The man is a bit strange, but he's harmless. Since he lives alone, maybe he tinkers with the garden at night. Just old age, I guess." "No, Leo," I said. "There was no trace in the garden this morning. It was as if it had never been dug." Leo paused for a moment, then smiled. "Maybe you're just very tired, my friend. After city life, this silence might be playing tricks on you." When I returned home in the evening, I found my mother singing in the kitchen. "Marcus, Mr. Miller brought us some of his homemade pies for dinner. What a kind man, isn't he? Say. I looked at the pie on the table. It smelled good, but a feeling of revulsion formed inside me. I had seen how those hands dug that muddy earth during the night. I woke up again that night at exactly 3 a.m. This time, there was no sound, but the feeling that something was watching me was so strong that I sat up in my bed. My bedroom window looked directly at Miller's house. I slowly approached the window. Miller was standing in his own upstairs window, right behind the curtain. Motionless, like a statue, he was looking at our house directly into my room. The lights were off, but the moonlight illuminated that bony face. In those dull stares, he was holding something in his hand. A long, thin metal rod or a knife. Primera pulled back, but the weight of that gaze had permeated every corner of my room. When morning came, Miller was the same again. He was pruning the roses in his garden, joking with his neighbors. But now, I was sure, behind that endearing mask in this town, there was something hidden beneath the earth. And every night, Miller was digging through that silence to keep that thing there or to bring it out. "Leo," I said when I went to school the next day, "we are going to watch him tonight. Step by step. I need to find out what he's doing in that garden and why those holes disappear in the morning." Leo refused at first, but when he saw the unshakable fear in my eyes, he accepted. "Fine, Marcus. Let's meet at 1 a.m. at the old shed in your garden. But I hope we only witness an old man's interest in gardening." As the sun set that evening, Yezilvadi was draped in its usual peace. But for me, this peace was now like the silence of an approaching storm. What was the truth behind Miller's kind smile? How could the earth be so perfect every morning? The answer to these questions was waiting for us that night, under that dark willow tree. When midnight fell, Yezilvadi sank into a deep silence, as if a heavy velvet cover had been spread over it. Even that distant hum of the city did not reach here. There was only that annoying, rhythmic sound of the crickets. Leo, as we had agreed, slipped through the back door of the old woodshed in the garden and came to my side. He had a dim flashlight in his hand and that worried expression on his face that seemed to say, "What are we doing here? We can still give up." "Marcus," he whispered, "the man is just old and lonely. Maybe he's sleepwalking." A man who sleepwalks cannot dig the exact same spot every night without missing an inch and make it seamless by morning. "Leo," I said through my teeth, "we're going to watch." We positioned ourselves at an angle through the wooden gaps of the woodshed that overlooked Miller's garden. At exactly 15 a.m., Miller's back door opened softly. He didn't turn on the light. The door didn't even creak. Miller came out again in those thin, stained pajamas. But this time he didn't just have a pickaxe in his hand. He had a large, pitch-black plastic bag with him that was clearly heavy. I could hear Leo's breathing quicken. Miller went under the usual willow tree. First, he looked around. His gaze paused for a moment toward our woodshed. At that moment, my heart beat, as if it would pierce my ribcage. It was as if he didn't just see US, but knew exactly that we were there, even the air we breathed. Then he slowly turned forward and began to dig. Thud, thud. The sound echoed like a sledgehammer in the silence of the night. Miller was digging the earth fiercely. He was soaked in sweat, but his tempo never dropped. About an hour later, he had opened a hole deep enough for a human to fit comfortably. Inside, then, dragging that black bag, he brought it to the edge of the pit. "What is that?" whispered Leo. His voice was trembling. "What's inside it, Marcus?" I couldn't answer. Miller pushed the bag into the pit. The thud sound it made when it fell made it feel like the thing inside was heavy and soft. Miller didn't stop. he immediately began throwing dirt over it. But the strange thing was this. While throwing the dirt over it, he was also mumbling something. We couldn't tell if he was praying or telling someone something, but his voice, merging with the howl of the wind, turned into a spine-chilling melody. "Look," I said, squeezing Leo's arm. "Look how he's smoothing the earth." After Miller completely filled the pit, he began to step on the earth with his feet. But this wasn't just stepping. He was crushing and flattening the earth as if it were the final piece of a ritual. Then he went over it with a rake. Within 10 minutes, that area became indistinguishable from the rest of the garden. It was as if a massive hole hadn't been opened there seconds ago. When Miller finished his work, he straightened up. He took something out of his pocket, a small bottle. He sprinkled the liquid in the bottle over the place he had dug. At that moment, under the moonlight, I saw the earth glow slightly, as if it were coming alive. Right before Miller entered his house, he turned toward our woodshed and looked into the darkness with that terrible, toothless smile. Then he closed the door and went inside. Did he? Did he see? I said, turning to Leo. Leo's face was as pale as chalk. "I saw," he said with difficulty, "the thing inside that bag. Marcus, the thing inside that bag moved. I saw it." The bag jerked for a moment just before falling into the pit. I was frozen. I had only focused on the weight of the bag, but Leo said it moved. Leo didn't want to leave that night. We waited in the woodshed until the sun rose. With the first light of morning, Miller came out to his garden. He had a clean gardener's apron on and a watering can in his hand. Right on top of the place where he buried the bag last night, he left fresh purple violets in a pot. Towards noon, while my father was preparing to light the grill in the garden, Miller approached the edge of the fence. "Beautiful day, isn't it, Mr. Kaplan?" He said to my father. "Marcus and his friend look very tired today too. That's youth, I guess. It must be hard to stay up at night." My father laughed. "That's right, Miller. City kids couldn't get used to the silence." Miller looked at me. His eyes resembled those dull glass spheres from last night. "Silence is valuable, son," he said in a low voice. "But sometimes the earth hears more than those who step on it. Be careful. My violets in the garden are very sensitive." At that moment, I realized that Miller wasn't actually giving us a warning. He was clearly threatening us. Whatever was under those violets must not wake up. When I met with Leo at school, we had both reached the same decision. We had to find out what was under Miller's veil, but we didn't yet know that while doing this, we would be taking on not just Miller, but the whole town. "Tonight," said Leo, "we will tear those violets from their place and look underneath. When Miller is asleep, we will solve the secret of that earth." As it began to get dark, Greenvalley put on its peaceful, deceptive mask once again, but I knew that. The neighbors behind the windows were not just watching us. They were waiting for that thud sound to come from beneath the earth. While Miller's violets swayed slightly in the wind, whatever was inside that black bag beneath them was going to meet us. Tonight, when midnight arrived, it was as if the whole town hadn't sunk into a deep sleep, but into the silence of a great secret. When I met Leo in the woodshed, every breath we took echoed inside the room like a storm. The plan was simple, but its fear had seeped into my very marrow. When the lights in Miller's house went out, we would jump over the fences and dig up the earth under those Marcus, Leo said in a whisper, "if what we think is really in that bag, we have to go to the police. We have to run away from here without telling anyone. The police, I said, my voice trembling. Leo, while they were talking to my father this morning, they described how good a neighbor Miller is. Even the town sheriff has coffee with Miller every morning. No one would believe us. We have to see it with our own eyes. At 2:30, that dim yellow light on Miller's upper floor went out. We waited for a few minutes. The town was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat thumping against my ribcage. We went to the edge of the fences on our tiptoes when we jumped into the garden. Even that slight crushing sound my boots made on the grass felt like an explosion to me. We reached the spot under the willow tree where the purple violets were. The violets looked pitch black in the darkness. Leo plunged the small garden shovel he held into the earth. But the earth was soft. It was as if it were flour. After digging a few centimeters, the shovel hit something hard. The bag is here, Leo said, catching his breath. I pushed the dirt aside with my hand. When I touched that cold, smooth surface of the plastic bag, an electric current passed through my body. I tried to tear the plastic with my fingernails, but it was too thick. Leo ripped the bag open from end to end with the sharp tip of the shovel. What burst out was not a corpse. Dozens, hundreds of old photographs, pieces of clothing, hair clips, and shoes spilled out from inside the bag. But the strange thing was this. The faces of the people living in this town were in all the photographs. Friends from our school, the grocer, the sheriff. A cross had been marked in red ink over all their photos, and at the very bottom of the bag lay that silver necklace my mother said she lost in the kitchen just a few days ago. This isn't a spell or a ritual, Marcus Leo said while examining the photos. This is a collection. This man is collecting us. At that moment, something else came out from the very bottom of the bag. Something wet, heavy, and smelling of meat. It was wrapped in a small piece of cloth. When I opened the cloth, my stomach turned. It was an animal carcass, but it was sewn to look like human limbs with a note in Miller's handwriting attached to it. Welcome, Marcus. Let's get out of here, I said. But when I stood up, I froze. The back door of Miller's house was wide open, but no light was coming from inside. A silhouette emerged from the darkness. It wasn't Miller. It was Mr. Thomas, the town grocer. He was holding a lantern and had that usual endearing smile on his face. But his eyes were pitch black. Young men, Mr. Thomas said in a calm voice, it is a sin to stir the secrets beneath the earth, especially if those secrets were buried for you. Another sound came from behind us. Sheriff Jenkins was looking at us over the fence with a rifle in his hand. Marcus, you should have gone home, son. Your Uncle Miller had planted very beautiful violets for you. Why did you disturb the peace? The peaceful people of the town began to emerge one by one from the darkness. Miller was standing at the very back. He had that famous pickaxe in his hand. I told you, Miller said, his voice deep and authoritative this time. Everything flows slowly in Yezovadi. The earth digests everything. Now, it's time to fill that hole you opened. We were surrounded. This wasn't a supernatural event. This was the collective madness of an entire town. Watuikayet. Peace was the cover over this massive graveyard they were hiding. I squeezed Leo's hand. We're going to run, I whispered. Now, Miller raised his pickaxe into the air, but not to hit us, he hit the ground. That thud sound was like a flare. They all started, walking toward us at once, but not like zombies. With calm and determined steps, like neighbors inviting us to their homes. We have to go home. Leo, my mother, and father, they are still sleeping inside. As we started running toward the house, I saw that our own garden was actually no different from Miller's. Under every tree, at the base of every flower, lay a bag, a secret, and the shadow of a victim. And the worst part was that moment when I saw my father looking at us from the kitchen window and giving a nod of approval toward Miller. My father was one of them, or he had already been included among them. The moment I saw my father's ice cold, soulless approval, my world came crashing down. By the time Leo and I crossed the garden, like shadows, and reached the veranda door, we were breathless. Behind us, an entire town, with pickaxes and lanterns in their hands, was approaching silently but determinedly, as if in a funeral procession. Their silence was much more terrifying than their shouting. "Mom! Mom! Open the door!" I shouted, pounding on the glass. The door suddenly opened. My mother was standing before us in her nightgown. Her face was deathly pale, but that dullness of the townsfolk wasn't in her eyes. On the contrary, pure horror and determination were glowing. "Get inside quickly," she whispered, pulling us in sharply and locking the door. She pulled the heavy cast iron bolt behind it. "Your father," my mother said, her voice trembling. "Your father is upstairs, Marcus. He is not one of us anymore. Ever since he ate that pie this evening, it's as if he's speaking with someone else's voice. Mom. They're outside. Miller, the sheriff. They're all at the door." My mother went to the kitchen counter and took the largest bread knife in her hand. In her other hand, she was holding the car keys. "I know. I've been watching them since evening. I saw what Miller buried in the garden. This town is a swamp, Marcus. They bury people alive in the earth, in their own secrets, but they won't take my children." Just then, heavy footsteps began to come from the upper floor. Thud, thud, thud. The creaking of the stairs echoed inside the house. My father's voice came from above, muffled as if soil had escaped into his throat. "Marcus and Leo, why are you outside? Your Uncle Miller's violets need attention. The earth is very dry. They need some life water. We have to escape," Leo said, looking at the back door. "They've blocked the back door," my mother sighed. "We'll go out through the garage. The car is there. Marcus, you take Leo and run to the garage. I will stall your father. I won't leave you here. Mom, listen to me." My mother grabbed my shoulders and shook me. When I looked into her eyes, I saw a lion emerge from my loving mother. "You didn't see what your father turned into. He is no longer the man I married. He became a part of this town. Go to the garage and start the engine. I'm coming." The footsteps from above had reached the top of the stairs. My father appeared, holding that rake with which he smoothed the garden every morning. But the tips of the rake had been sharpened and were gleaming. That terrifying, artificial smile was on his face. "Do you want to go?" But we just moved in. The roots of Yesilvadi are deep. They won't let you go. My mother lunged forward. "Run!" she shouted. Leo and I bolted toward the garage door. Behind me, I saw my father make a move toward my mother, while my mother blocked the stairwell like a shield. When we entered the garage, The sounds coming from outside had increased. Dot Miller and the others had started hitting the windows. They were scratching the glass with their fingertips. That famous scratching sound gave the feeling that thousands of rats were roaming inside the walls. I jumped into the car and turned the ignition. The roar of the engine echoed inside the garage. Come on, Mom. Come on. I was praying. The inner door of the garage opened, and my mother, with a deep scratch on her arm and out of breath, burst inside. She immediately jumped into the passenger seat. Drive, Marcus. Break right through the garage door. Don't stop. I put it in. Rivas and floored the gas, while the garage door was smashed with a great noise. I saw those peaceful neighbors stepping aside one by one. Sheriff Jenkins aimed his rifle, but Miller raised his hand and stopped him. Miller was standing in the middle of the road, leaning on his rusty pickaxe, looking at O's. There was no anger on his face. There was only an expression, as if saying, "You will return anyway." As we drove rapidly toward the exit of the town, we saw the curtains of every house on the roadside part, every neighbor seeing. U.S. off with a lantern in their hand. No one was shouting, no one was cursing. They were just watching. The town limit is close, Leo said, looking back. Are they following? No, said my mother, pressing on the wound on her arm. They won't follow. They are loyal to their earth. They only claim. What is there? As we passed the sign that said "Welcome to Yezelvadi," the sun had begun to appear on the horizon. When the gray smoke and noise of the city appeared in the distance, I realized for the first time in my life that I missed that noise. When we reached the city, leaving that ominous boundary sign of Yezelvadi behind, the sunrise became a hope that warmed our hearts for the first time. But my mother had no intention of stopping. She drove the car directly to the regional police headquarters. The wound on her arm was still aching. Her clothes were covered in mud, but her eyes held the greatest determination I'd ever seen in my life. We will shut that place down, Marcus, she said, while gripping the steering wheel. We will save not just ourselves, but everyone buried in that swamp. The legal battle and investigation process, which lasted 4 weeks, began. My mother presented us evidence to pieces left from that pie my father ate at dinner in the bag full of the collection we took with us while escaping from the garden. In the examinations, a rare plant extract native to that region was found inside the pie, which paralyzes the nervous system and makes the person open to external stimuli. This was not a spell. It was a modern poisana biological chain. The townsfolk used to control people. The police raid on Yezelvadi was carried out with a dawn operation. Those peaceful neighbors of ours met the teams with pickaxes in their hands and their dull stares. However, this time they were not facing defenseless children. Miller's dot garden, the sheriff's house, and the school basement were dug up one by one. The belongings and documents of dozens of people who had been missing for years, and the town's dark archive came to light. Miller, Sheriff Jenkins, and the grocer Thomas, along with the town's prominent figures, were arrested on charges of collective insanity and illegal experimentation. Even while being handcuffed, Miller was still looking at my mother with that dull smile. But my mother didn't look away for a single moment. For my father, the process was more painful. The effect of that poison had left permanent damage to his mind. He didn't even remember his own name. He was just muttering, "The earth is thirsty." My mother found the best rehabilitation center and psychiatric hospital for his recovery. My father is now in safe hands, far from the city being treated in a completely sterile environment. He no longer has a pickaxe in his hand. He only reads the books my mother brings to him. Although his gaze still drifts to far-off places sometimes, we can see him slowly shedding that dark Yezelvadi mask. Our greatest victory was the fate of Yezelvadi by mobilizing non-governmental organizations and the media. My mother ensured that the place was declared a danger zone. The state sealed the perimeter of the town with high fences. Entrance and exit were completely prohibited. Those houses, those gardens, and those famous willow trees were now left to the mercy of nature. A month later, I went to the front of that sealed boundary with my mother. In the back, our old house was visible from a distance, but Miller was no longer in the windows. The gardens were filled with wild weeds from neglect. My mother took the key to the old house out of her pocket and threw it over the fences toward that dark past. "It's over, Marcus," she said, taking a deep breath. "The earth will no longer be able to swallow anyone." When we returned to this city, we sat on the balcony of our apartment. The noise of the city, the exhaust fumes, and the endless crowd. Everything I used to complain about now felt like life itself to me. Now, when I got up to drink water at night, I didn't hear a pickaxe sound coming from outside. There was only the living, real, and innocent hum of the city. Miller's words, "Silence is valuable," were no longer a threat, but like a distant fairy tale. We had found peace not in silence, but in the voice of truth and justice. While my mother hummed those old, cheerful songs of hers in the kitchen again, I closed my eyes with the peace of having torn away that black bag pulled over our lives forever. We were safe, and this time we were truly happy.